Welcome to my channel, and today I want to share a story that will leave you speechless. It's about a woman whose carefully hidden secrets are suddenly exposed, unraveling lies, betrayal, and heartbreak in the most shocking way. This story will take you inside a moment of truth where trust is broken, and lives are changed forever, showing just how far deception can go, and what happens when the truth finally comes out. When Ethan Miller and his girlfriend, Madison Clark, walked into the quiet little restaurant tucked between two aging brick buildings on the far end of Willow Street, the place felt calm enough to be a perfect escape from the sweltering afternoon heat. But the moment they slid into their seats, Madison's entire expression shifted in a way Ethan had never seen before. Her shoulders tensed, her breaths became shallow, and her eyes, normally warm, bright, and playful, kept drifting toward a waiter standing near the counter, each glance quick, scared, and filled with a nervousness that made Ethan instantly alert, because he knew Madison well enough to sense when something was deeply off. And this wasn't normal discomfort or simple hunger, but something else, something heavy that sat in the air between them like a fog. Ethan leaned toward her, lowering his voice in concern as he asked, "Babe, why do you keep staring at that waiter? Is something wrong? You're acting strange?" But Madison, avoiding his eyes, quickly shook her head and whispered urgently, "Ethan, let's just go somewhere else, please. I don't want to stay here." Her voice trembling slightly, though she tried her best to hide it. Ethan frowned, glancing toward the window where waves of heat shimmered off the pavement outside, reminding him how brutally hot it was today, nearly unbearable. And the fact that there wasn't another restaurant for miles only made her sudden desperation to leave even more confusing. He couldn't understand why she'd rather suffer outside than sit in an air-conditioned dining room with soft lighting, gentle music, and barely any people. Before Madison could explain herself or come up with an excuse, Ethan saw the waiter begin walking their way, carrying a small notepad and wearing the polite smile of a man who had taken thousands of orders in his life. But the second his eyes landed on Madison, he froze mid-step, his smile vanishing, his entire face tightening as though he'd just stumbled on the one person he never expected to see again. And Ethan could practically feel the tension cut through the air like a blade. Hoping to break the awkward silence, Ethan cleared his throat and looked at the waiter, expecting the man to look away or regain his composure. But instead, the waiter stared straight at Madison with a mix of hurt, anger, and disbelief that made Ethan's stomach twist. And when Ethan spoke, "Yes, Ma, and what would you like to order?" Madison didn't answer because she sat frozen, her hands trembling slightly as she stared down at them, avoiding both men entirely. Then, before Ethan could repeat the question, the waiter said something that sent a strange chill down Ethan's spine. "I know what she eats. She loves pasta. I'll bring it," he said, his voice low, cold, and carrying a familiarity that made Ethan's heart jolt because he had guessed Madison's favorite dish exactly right, something Ethan believed only people close to her would know. Ethan blinked and asked sharply, "Exactly right. But how do you know that?" The waiter didn't hesitate. Instead, he lifted his gaze and looked directly at Ethan with a mix of bitterness and exhaustion, saying, "Because I'm her husband, or at least I was." And Ethan felt his entire body freeze, his mind struggling to process the words as a wave of disbelief crashed into him. "What nonsense is this, Madison?" Ethan said firmly, his voice rising with confusion and a sting of betrayal. "What is he talking about?" Madison's head dropped even lower, her shoulders curling inward as shame spread across her face like a shadow. The waiter, whose namatag read Luke Harrison, continued, his voice trembling slightly, but steady enough to show he meant every word. "She cheated on me," Luke said, his jaw tight with hurt that seemed to have been simmering for a long time. "And now I finally know with who." Ethan felt his own face burn with anger as he stared at the woman he thought he knew better than anyone. The woman who had told him she was single. The woman who had told him her parents died in a tragic accident years ago. The woman who claimed she had no close family left. "You told me you were single," Ethan said, his voice shaking now. "You told me your parents died." "You lied about everything," Madison swallowed hard, her eyes filling with guilt. She could no longer hide as Ethan's world tilted beneath him. "Luke wasn't done," he added sharply. "Sir, her parents are alive and healthy. She lied to both of us." Ethan's anger flared hot and unforgiving as he snapped, "What kind of woman are you? You used me. You're nothing but a gold digger. Get out of here and don't ever talk to me again." Madison's tears finally spilled as she turned toward Luke, her real husband, reaching for him with trembling hands as she cried, "Please, I'm sorry, forgive me. I made a mistake." But Luke stepped back, his eyes cold, distant, and filled with the finality of a man who had been pushed too far for too long, and he said, "Enough. The divorce papers will reach you soon. Don't come back to my house." As Luke's cold words cut through the tense room, the restaurant seemed to fall into a heavy silence, the kind where even the quiet clinking of plates in the distance felt too loud. And Madison, still standing between the two men whose lives she had entangled, felt her knees weaken as the weight of everything she had been hiding pressed down on her all at once. But Ethan didn't move toward her or offer comfort. Instead, he pushed back his chair, the legs scraping sharply against the floor, a sound that echoed her collapsing world, and he stared at her with a bitterness she had never seen in his eyes before. Madison had expected anger, maybe even shock, but she hadn't expected the cold disgust that settled on Ethan's face. A look that said he no longer saw her as the woman he had cared for, laughed with, and trusted for months. She tried to speak, tried to explain something, anything, but the words tangled in her throat, because she knew there was no excuse strong enough to bridge the lies she had built her life around. Ethan's voice shook with disbelief as he said, "I can't believe I wasted months of my life on you. Do you even know what honesty is?" His words landed like blows, and Madison flinched with each one, knowing she deserved them, but still hurting deeply because she truly had cared for Ethan in her own complicated, misguided way. Luke crossed his arms, his jaw tightening as memories good and bad flashed behind his eyes. And he said, "Madison, do you have any idea what it felt like to come home one day and find your wife gone? No note, no explanation, just silence. You walked out like our marriage meant nothing. I spent months trying to figure out what I did wrong." Madison's tears fell faster, her chest tightening with guilt as she whispered, "Luke, I didn't leave because of you. I left because I felt trapped and worthless. I didn't know who I was anymore. I told myself I needed a fresh start." Luke shook his head bitterly. "A fresh start doesn't mean abandoning your husband and lying about your entire life. You could have talked to me. I loved you. I would have listened," he said, his voice cracking slightly. The first hint that beneath the anger lived a deep wound she had carved into him. Ethan scoffed loudly, unable to believe he had stepped into such a tangled nightmare. "So what? You ran from your marriage and decided to build a new persona with me? You said your parents died. Madison, what kind of person lies about something like that?" Madison winced, her voice barely audible as she replied, "I know it sounds horrible, but I felt suffocated by them. They controlled everything, my job, my friends, my marriage. I thought if I said they died, people would stop asking about them." Ethan shook his head sharply. "You're unbelievable. Yet you don't get to rewrite your life by killing off your parents in your stories. That's sick." Madison pressed her hands to her face, trying to wipe away tears she knew wouldn't stop anytime soon. And Luke watched her quietly, not with pity, but with a hardened sadness that had replaced whatever love he once held. "Madison, I begged you to go to counseling," Luke continued, each word measured and firm. "Told you we could work through your stress, your anxiety, everything you were dealing with. Tried to be patient, but you shut me out. I didn't deserve this." Madison lowered her hands, her voice shaking as she replied, "I was scared. Luke, I didn't know how to tell you how lost I felt. And then I met Ethan. He was kind, steady, and he didn't know my past. For the first time, I felt like someone saw me without judgment." Ethan let out a cold laugh. "Yeah, I saw exactly who you pretended to be, not who you are." His words sliced straight into her chest, and Madison felt her stomach twist as she realized how deeply she had hurt both of them, loving Ethan while still legally tied to Luke, lying to both men while trying to escape the person she had been. The tension tightened again when a woman at a nearby table gasped softly, clearly having overheard much of their conversation, but no one in the restaurant dared intervene. The staff stood frozen behind the counter, feeling the gravity of the moment, but knowing it wasn't their place to interrupt. Luke took a slow breath, as if steadying himself, and said, "You can cry, Madison, but those tears won't fix what you destroyed. I waited for you, I looked for you. I hoped you'd come back with an apology, or at least an explanation. Instead, I find you here, on a date with another man." Hearing it framed so simply made the pain even more raw, and Madison whispered, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you." Luke shook his head. "Intentions don't matter when the damage is this real." Ethan stepped back from the table entirely now, grabbing his wallet from his pocket and tossing a $20 bill onto the surface, even though no food had been ordered yet, as if the money could erase his presence from the space faster. "Hey, I'm done with this," he said sharply. "I don't want to hear another excuse. You're not the woman I thought you were. I don't want you near me ever again." Madison looked at him desperately. "Ethan, please, let me explain from the beginning. I didn't cheat on you. I wasn't with Luke after I left. I didn't go from one man to another." Ethan raised a hand to silence her. "You think that makes this better? You were still married, Madison? You didn't tell me? That's betrayal." "End of discussion," Luke quietly added. "And betrayal of your vows." Madison's breath hitched, her entire body trembling as she stood there. Emotionally pulled apart by the two lives she had built on shaky ground, Ethan took a step backward, creating physical distance that made something inside Madison break. But she didn't chase him. Instead, she turned toward Luke, still hoping desperately for at least a sliver of forgiveness. "Luke, I loved you," she said in a small voice. "I did. I just didn't know how to be the person you needed." But Luke looked at her with tired eyes, no longer burning with anger but filled with a quiet resignation. "Maybe you loved me once," he said softly. "But love without honesty is nothing. I deserve better." His final words hit her harder than either man's anger had, because they came from a place of deep truth. A place where love had lived before she suffocated it with her lies. Madison opened her mouth to ask if there was any chance, any possibility of repairing even a fragment of what they once had. But Luke stepped back, shaking his head slowly. "No, Madison, some things you don't come back from," he said, his tone final in a way that made her knees nearly buckle. Ethan turned to leave first, walking toward the door with quick, angry steps. And the bell above the entrance chimed sharply as he pushed it open, letting in a blast of scorching air from outside. Luke lingered for a moment longer, staring at the woman he had once imagined building a future with. And for a second, she thought she saw something soft flicker in his expression, but it faded as quickly as it came.
"I'll wait. You'll get the divorce papers soon," he said, and turned.
And walked away, leaving Madison standing alone, surrounded by the remains of two lives she had destroyed. For several long seconds after Ethan and Luke walked out, Madison remained frozen in place, unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to understand how everything she had tried so desperately to escape had come crashing back down on her in the span of a few minutes inside a small restaurant she never meant to enter. She felt exposed, shattered, and painfully aware that the carefully constructed world she had built fragile, as glass had finally broken in the most humiliating way possible. As she stood trembling beside the table, she could feel the quiet gaze of strangers around the room, some watching with sympathy, others with judgment, and some pretending not to notice even though their ears were still tuned to every word. The embarrassment wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was knowing that Luke's disappointment and Ethan's disgust were both justified, and that she had truly hurt people who had cared for her in different ways. Slowly, she pulled out her chair and sank into it, pressing both hands to her forehead as waves of panic and regret crashed through her. Her mind replayed everything that had let her hear every lie she had told, every truth she had avoided, every fear she had buried, till she could barely distinguish past from present. After several minutes of sitting there alone, she forced herself to stand, her legs unsteady, and walked toward the exit with a heart that felt too heavy for her chest. When she stepped outside, the suffocating heat wrapped around her, but she barely noticed. Her thoughts a tangled whirlwind as she stared down the sidewalk where Ethan had disappeared moments earlier. She wanted to run after him, to beg him to listen, to give her a chance to explain the reasons behind her lies. Reasons that weren't good enough but were still real. But she knew he wouldn't hear her. Not now, maybe not ever. And Luke. She didn't even know where to begin with Luke, as she stood there blinking against the hot sunlight. A deep ache settled in her stomach as memories of her marriage flooded her mind with painful clarity. The day she met Luke during a volunteer event at a community center, the warmth of his smile, the steadiness of his personality, the safety she felt in his presence. At first, she genuinely believed he was the man who would make everything in her life better, and for a while, he did. But Madison had always lived in the shadow of her parents' expectations, the suffocating pressure they placed on her to be perfect career, perfect marriage, perfect choices. Luke tried to understand, tried to help her feel free. But she never found the courage to reveal the full truth of how trapped she felt in her own life. Instead, she forced herself into the mold everyone expected of her, until the walls grew so tight, she couldn't. T breathed, and one morning she woke up beside Luke, feeling like a stranger in her own home, her own marriage, her own skin. She hadn't left because she didn't love him. She left because she didn't know how to love herself while constantly pretending to be someone she wasn't. Standing now on the sidewalk, with sweat clinging to her temples and her chest tightening from the weight of it all, she knew she couldn't keep running from her past, Not anymore. Maybe it was time to face it head on, if everything she feared would happen already had. She walked slowly back toward her apartment, each step feeling heavier than the last. The city sounds around her muted beneath the noise of her own thoughts. By the time she reached the small studio she had rented under a different name, her shirt clung to her back and her mind was spinning wildly. She unlocked the door with trembling hands, stepped inside, and collapsed onto the couch, letting out a long, broken sob the moment she felt the cushion beneath her. She cried until her chest hurt, until her eyes burned, until the energy drained out of her completely. And then she sat, staring blankly at the ceiling, trying to piece together what she would do next. Eventually, she reached for her phone with a shaky hand and stared at the screen. Dozens of missed calls lit up the display, most of them from her mother, a few from her father, one from the neighbor who always tried to keep tabs on her family. Madison's stomach twisted. She had left them too, but not in the same dramatic way she left Luke. She had simply drifted away, ignoring their calls, avoiding their expectations, pretending she didn't care, but she did. And now, after everything that happened today, she dreaded the idea of facing them again. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. Madison, you can't run from your responsibilities. You can't hide from the truth. Back then, she hated hearing it. Now, the words stung because they were true. She swallowed hard, set the phone down, and forced herself to consider the next step. She had lost the man she was dating, and she had destroyed her marriage. Her lies were out in the open now, and nothing she said could undo the damage. But maybe if she was brave enough, she could start being honest for the first time in years. Taking a deep breath, she picked up the phone again and stared at her parents' contact names. She knew calling would open a door she'd been terrified to walk through. But she also knew she couldn't keep living in emotional isolation. She needed to face the consequences, with her heart pounding. She pressed the call button. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then her mother answered with a sharp, panicked Madison. "Oh my God, where have you been? Why haven't you answered? We've been worried sick." Hearing her mother's voice after so long made Madison's throat tighten, and she swallowed hard before saying softly, "Mom, I need to talk to you and Dad about everything." There was silence on the other end. Then her mother's voice softened with caution. "Come home," she said. "We'll talk here." Madison hesitated, anxiety creeping back into her chest, but she agreed. An hour later, she found herself standing on her parents' front porch, staring at the familiar door she had avoided for far too long. Memories flooded, back family dinners full of tension. Her mother's constant criticism disguised as concern. Her father's disappointed sighs whenever she made a choice he didn't approve of. She wasn't ready to walk inside, but she knocked anyway. The door swung open, revealing her mother, Karen Clark, whose eyes were wide with a mixture of relief and lingering frustration, while her father, Richard Clark, stood just behind her, arms crossed, watching Madison with a guarded expression that made her chest tighten with guilt. She stepped inside, feeling the familiar walls close around her, each corner crowded with memories she had tried to escape. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to simply breathe. Knowing the confrontation she had been avoiding was finally unavoidable, Karen's voice softened, though it still carried a tremor of anger. "Madison, we've been worried sick. Where have you been? What happened?" Madison swallowed hard, her throat dry, and replied honestly, the words spilling out in a torrent she hadn't expected. I ran. I lied. About my parents, about everything. I couldn't handle the pressure of your expectations, the constant judgment. I felt trapped, and I thought if I could create a new life somewhere else, I could finally breathe. But I was wrong. Richard's face remained stern but attentive, and Madison continued, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I thought leaving Luke and hiding from him, leaving Ethan, it would fix things, but it didn't. I hurt them. I hurt everyone I loved. I don't know how to make it right, but I know I have to try." Her parents exchanged a glance, and for a moment, Madison thought they might turn away in frustration or disbelief, but instead, Karen stepped closer, taking Madison's hand in hers. "We can't undo the past," Karen said gently, "but we can start from now. We need honesty, Madison. Nothing else will work." If you're ready to be truthful, we can help you." Richard's voice, though firm, carried warmth now. "You made mistakes. Everyone does. But running won't solve them. Facing them does. We'll support you, but you have to be brave enough to face the consequences of your choices." Madison nodded, her chest heaving, as she allowed herself to lean on them for the first time in years, feeling the weight of her guilt mingle with the fragile hope that maybe she could rebuild her life with honesty and integrity. Later that evening, Madison sat alone in her old bedroom, replaying the restaurant confrontation in her mind, the hurt in Ethan's eyes, the betrayal in Luke's tone, the shame of all the lies she had told, but she also felt a strange sense of relief. The truth was out raw and painful, yet liberating in its own way, and she knew there was no going back to the person she had been. She thought about Luke and Ethan, about how much she had loved and hurt them both, and made a silent vow to live differently, to own her actions, to face people with honesty, and to rebuild the bridges she had burned as best she could. Madison understood that forgiveness wouldn't come easily, not from them, not from her parents, and certainly not from herself. At first, but for the first time in a long time, she felt the possibility of a future unburdened by lies, a life where honesty would guide her. Choices, and a chance, however small, to become someone she could be proud of. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she whispered softly into the darkness, "I will make it right. Somehow I will, and though the road ahead would be long, painful, and uncertain." Madison Clark felt the first stirrings of hope, the fragile but undeniable sense that she could rebuild her life on truth, and perhaps in time find the peace and love she had so desperately sought. What would you do if you were in Madison's place? Story is a reminder that lies always catch up, and the truth has a way of finding its way out, no matter how carefully it's hidden. Sometimes the hardest path is facing the consequences of our own choices, and forgiveness isn't always guaranteed. Honesty and trust are priceless, and when they're broken, the impact can last a lifetime. Life has a way of exposing secrets, and the lessons we learn from our mistakes often come too late, but they are lessons nonetheless. Could love survive after betrayal like this? Could you forgive someone who hurt you deeply? Think about it and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Drop a heart and comment, like and subscribe my channel. And visit my channel for more interesting stories, videos,